Thank you very much indeed for inviting me here. So double disappointment, obviously I'm the wrong gender, and equally the worst gig in the world is to follow Peter when it comes to giving a talk about anything. So anyway, good morning. I'm James Stevens from a company called Yellow Dog. This morning I'm going to give you kind of 10-15 minutes with a little bit of a view of creativity and technology, friend or foe. Now, the shock of the new, the title of this morning's session, reminded me of a very famous quote from Arthur C. Clarke back in 1937, which was, he said, "The future is here, it's just unevenly distributed." So, in my introduction, Greg mentioned 3 decades in technology. I know it's hard to believe that I'm that old, but we've seen some very significant trends. But we also see some patterns. And when we kind of begin to think about the impact of digitization, communication, and distributed compute on creativity and production, I think we'll begin to see where the Arthur C. Clarke quote begins to have some relevance. So, you know, we are looking across the room. I think a few people may remember some of these days, but the sort of Intel, the advent of the personal computer, giving everyone the opportunity to actually create, produce in their own home, but changed the way the world forever. It felt as though that was an accelerating thing, and then I think it was Reading University academics actually came up with the photonics, where we could use fiber optics to send data, and suddenly the possibility of communicating, reducing distance, communicating globally took off, and the internet was born. The internet spawned then applications that did different things, changed the way we interacted as a society. Sometimes you could argue good, sometimes bad. Mobility, the advent of mobile communications, marrying with the internet, again, changed the paradigm of how people interact. It created different social groups, different political methods of influence, some good, some bad. We don't need to go into detail, but current in the news at the moment. But there was another kind of secondary impact of that, which was once you kind of enable digital mobile communication with interesting applications that change the way society interacts, changes the way we consume media, changes, as Peter mentioned, the ability for a 17-year-old in his attic to have 1 million YouTube views or likes, suddenly kind of shortens and breaks up what was the traditional either studio or hard work that went into pencil drawings or stop motion animation. So what does this mean? What does this mean for the next 10 years and for creative studios and production? Well, what we've seen in the preceding years is that the advance in computing power, the applications that now support it, mean that CGI, VFX, studios that are creating full-length movies completely with digital artists is the kind of new norm. It's sort of what you expect. I mean, in some ways, it's sort of, as a father of 3 children, it saddens me when I sort of try and curate film evenings with my children to show them the kind of the original Star Wars or the original thing, and wasn't this seminal? And they, within minutes, obviously on their devices, are saying, "This is really slow, Dad. You know, when's it going to get going?" And of course, the pace and the way in which we now create is driving a very different kind of user experience. But it's also driving massive reliance on infrastructure. So the latest Jungle Book, the Disney movie, had, I think, 250,000 frames of CGI, of which each individual frame took 40 hours to render on a high-performance workstation. So if you were just using that one high-performance workstation, that's hundreds of years it would have taken to actually render that. Insane. So what are we doing? Well, what we're doing is we're building data centers everywhere, and the sort of the new world of utility compute, distributed compute that studios can plug into. You no longer need to have great big render farms or huge numbers of servers. But there is a challenge with this, which is, despite the growth in computing power at a global level, the average utilization of servers in data centers is between 5 and 15%. Crazy, right? We're building more and more. Next statistic, the carbon output, the electricity used by server farms to power the internet, next year in 2020 will exceed the carbon footprint of the whole of the aviation industry. So we've kind of got a responsibility here as well. Continuing to extract commodities from the world, continuing to build more, drive more, but actually what are we doing to the planet? I had the pleasure of a conversation with someone from Netflix at Seagraph this summer, and he said, here at Netflix, our view is that actually we could employ every single digital artist on the planet right now for the content we want to generate in the next 3 years. That's insane. And then the question was, so what's competition in your view? Yeah, all these. He said, well, we probably see that competition for us is actually humans need to sleep. Again, where's this going? Where's this going? So the opportunities, though, that this technology, the disaggregation of studios technology, the underlying communications and compute infrastructure, actually gives the possibility of this democratization of creativity. The possibility that actually the Peter and David in their attic wanting to create something actually can create full-length feature films because they can knit together artists from around the world to produce it. They don't have to have big studios, big capital, big finance directors, cross-charging. The possibility is limitless, but the challenge here, I think, and this is the question that I want to kind of leave you with. When you empower everybody and anybody to have the ability to create digital content, is there a risk that the same thing that Peter started with David, that studios around the world have at their heart, is actually that it's not technology first? Technology enables things, it changes things, it creates different business models, but it doesn't drive anything. I put this up, the Disney Pixar film. In the film Up, when they were calculating how many balloons they would need to lift the house, the Disney animators, Pixar animators, recognized that actually there was a bit of open source software that would enable you to model balloons and how they moved if they were numbered together, but this software would actually only support 500 simultaneous balloons blowing in the wind realistically. The clever chaps at Disney spent a year writing the software to enable them to create the exact number, 20,622 balloons that would move absolutely perfectly, exactly as though they would in the wind. That is kind of cool, but it's also kind of irrelevant. The key thing that draws this together is it's the story will always win. The storytelling, whether it be drawing pictures, Peter started, or whether it be animating incredible films like Up, the story is always the key. Thank you.
Right. So, hi there, my name is Richard Cooper. I'm the Research Director for Ampere Analysis. Just a quick intro to Ampere Analysis. We are a media research company. One of the things that we do is that we track the availability of content on around 120 subscription video on demand platforms worldwide. So we look at their availability, how long they're available for, and that's part of what I'm going to show you today. So, just talking about the evolution of video on demand, my presentation sort of breaks into sort of 3 sections. We're going to start just by looking at the upcoming content that's coming from the sort of more established SVOD players, so the likes of Amazon and Netflix, but also Greg referred to them as the FANGs. There's a lot more to it than there was even 6 months ago with the launch of people like Disney+. So we're going to have a look at what proportion animation makes up of their catalogue. We're then going to look in some more detail at Amazon and Netflix, and I'll explain why as we go through. And then to finish, I'm going to talk about the potential acquisitions that both Amazon and Netflix need to make in order to maintain catalogue growth. But to begin, We're just looking here at the upcoming original slate for the SVOD providers. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is that I've carved off Netflix and Amazon to one side, and that's simply because the sheer volume of titles that they've commissioned over the course of the last 18 months dwarfs anything else that's going on. Now, at the moment, we've ranked these companies by their total number of commissions, but what I want to draw your attention to really is those green boxes at the bottom of each of those columns. Now, that gives us an indication about how many animation titles there are within the upcoming slate. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is that there's really only 3 of those companies who are making animation destination with their commissioned works, and that would be Netflix, Disney Plus, and HBO Max. Now, as you might expect from all of these, they're very much focused on sort of recognizable intellectual property. They're looking for titles that people will immediately recognize within that animation slate. So the example there would be perhaps Disney, where they are falling back on the Star Wars and Marvel franchises that they have. They are doing spin-offs from some of their Pixar movies, but they're also rebooting some of their older animated IP in the form of Chip and Dale. So those are the kind of titles that are pushing into those original commissioned works. The slightly interesting thing here from HBO Max is that a lot of their titles seem to be aimed at a much younger audience than we would normally expect for a subscription video on demand provider. So it's sort of 0 to 4 years is a bit of a focus for them. And given that animation makes up around a quarter of their current upcoming slate, it's quite a change for a newly launching subscription video on demand service. In terms of the total catalogue, however, I just want to draw your attention really to Amazon and Netflix here. This is the catalogue availability in the US. So most of what I'm talking about will be focused on the UK. But just for this one, because all the new services are going to the USA first, we're going to look at those here. But you can see the largest of those sort of potential catalogues being there from NBC Universal's Peacock is less than half the size of Netflix's US catalogue. So when I start to talk exclusively about Amazon Prime and Netflix, you'll understand why. They really are effectively defining how we view the video on demand market. So what we've got here is the animation catalogues that go to make up their persistent catalogues in the UK. I'm just going to start by talking about Amazon Prime on the left-hand side there. And what we can see is that their catalogue is growing hugely, particularly over the last sort of 2 years, 18 months. Now, the fastest area of growth for Amazon Prime has been in animated movies. Animated TV shows, it's still a growing category, and in order to maintain the proportion of animation within their catalogue, they're growing at an incredible rate. Movies is growing even faster, so it's actually outpacing, animated movies is outpacing the overall growth of Amazon's catalogue. Now, Amazon's overall catalogue is about twice the size of Netflix, so that gives you some idea of scale. Now, conversely, the animated movies portion of Netflix is relatively stable. It's around about 100 titles. Lots of titles dropping in and out of that over the course of any given year. The real area of growth for Netflix compared to Amazon is in their TV show catalogue. So that's a main area of driver for them. Now, if we just drill down into those separate parts in a little bit more detail, we can look at the types of genres that are being pushed into these catalogues. Now, absolutely no surprise here, the vast majority of both movies and TV content is children's content. For Amazon, their focus around movies, just under 3/4 is animated children's content, with the rest being focused more around adults animation, emphasis on the S there. So, you know, that is a big part of their sort of focus, particularly over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. In terms of their children's TV content, in terms of their TV content, that is nearly 90% covered by children's content. So, that is very much the focus within that particular subset of their catalogue. Now, if we shift to Netflix, their focus is about TV shows. Their movies, very much echoing the type of content that we see on Amazon. Quite a large proportion of those shows that are not children and family content, so not kids content, fall into the sort of anime type content, not all of it coming from Japan. So their focus is on TV shows. Now, whilst 2/3 of that is still children's content, what we see is actually quite a lot of investment in terms of adults animation. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what that means now. But in terms of the growth of adults animation within these persistent subscription video on demand catalogues, we can see that that's actually growing within both. So you've got Amazon again on the left-hand side of this, pushing up to around 15% of all of their animated content is directed at adults. For Netflix, that proportion is far, far higher. In fact, over 1/3 of all of that content is adults animation. So this is a real area of focus for both of these providers. Just looking at Amazon's adults animation, quite a lot of that is focused on sort of older animated films. There's quite a lot of critically acclaimed animated films within there. There is the sort of comic book style animation in there, and a lot of sort of critically acclaimed foreign animation content as well. One of the key differences between those two animated catalogues is that a lot of the content on Amazon Prime services is a good deal older than that which we would see for Netflix. Now, for Netflix, when we're looking at their movies, a lot of that content is starting to be anime style content, so not exclusively from Japan, but certainly that particular style of animation. On the TV side, which is their main focus, we see an awful lot of adults animation falling into that sort of comedy sort of TV bracket. Now, a lot of this is badged as original content when it's shown to consumers. The reality is that quite a lot of it is exclusive sort of world rights that Netflix has acquired. Now, one of the key things here is that we're starting to see these adults animated shows moving into their second, third, and fourth seasons on Netflix, which gives a real clear indication of exactly how important adults animation is for driving Netflix's subscriber acquisition, but also subscriber retention as well. So this is probably one of the more complicated charts that I'm going to foist on you. I do realise that I've rather stepped up here and started doing the science bit. So just to help you focus around this, what I want to draw your attention to is really the top 3 bars at both sides, and that's to focus around the sort of English language animated content. Now, you can see that for Amazon there on the left-hand side, there's a real focus for, it's really dominated by US animated content, with very little coming from elsewhere. When we look at the country of origin for a lot of Amazon's animated content, where we see spikes from other regions, this is generally following the rollout of their retail operations. So they very much use animation to support subscriber acquisition and subscriber retention in their key retail markets. So there's around 7 of those globally. When we shift our focus to Netflix, yet again you can see there is a very clear focus on sort of US type content. There is a secondary spike as well around sort of the Japanese animation. This is very much part of Netflix's play to make themselves a sort of go-to destination for sort of accessible anime. So they're not necessarily trying to compete with groups like Funimation and Crunchyroll. You know, they're trying to sort of push what we describe as, I think, mainstream anime to their immediate subscribers. Now, I'm going to just focus down a little bit further on just those UK titles. We'll start with Amazon. So quite understandably, the vast majority of those titles are focused around children's content. The interesting thing that we've observed here in terms of those UK titles is they tend to skew a little higher in terms of age groups than we would normally see for a lot of Amazon's children's content. So a few more titles in those sort of higher age groups. So that's quite unusual really for Amazon, where a lot of their focus tends to be on sort of 6 years and under in terms of their wider children's catalogue. Now, what that means in terms of the types of titles that they want to acquire over the course of the next sort of 12 to 18 months, well, they're going to need to acquire about 165 titles in order to maintain catalogue growth. So that huge level of growth that I was talking about right at the beginning of the presentation, this is very much echoed in terms of the volume of titles that they need to acquire. Now, the vast majority of those titles are actually going to be coming from sort of non-English language speaking countries, which I've dumped over there in the sort of Asia Pacific region really. So about 91 titles is going to come from those regions. Quite a lot of those titles are going to be anime titles. It's one of the areas that they seem to be growing from. For the UK and Ireland, we expect around 11 titles to be acquired, and the vast majority of those are going to be sort of children and family content. You know, again, aimed largely at the sort of under 6 demographic. There is a possibility there that they will also seek to acquire some a drama-related title as well. So quite a sort of niche set of titles that they're going to be looking to acquire from the UK and Ireland. If we switch now to Netflix, in exactly the same way we see a very heavy focus on children and family titles. Now, that's not to say they don't have interests in adults animation, yet again, but what they have currently on their service is very much focused around children's content. Now, you know, yet again, we're starting to see some variations between the UK content and that of their wider catalogue. We'd expect to see fewer titles in that 0 to 4 year age group. They tend to go for a slightly older sort of children's audience than we'd see for Amazon, for example. Now, one of the key areas, key differences between Amazon and Netflix is that Netflix, as we saw right at the very, very beginning, commission a lot of animation titles. It accounts for about 18% of their sort of upcoming commissioned work. So when that starts to influence the number of titles that they're actually going to acquire. So this is their commission slate. You can see a huge proportion of children and family, and indeed their only UK show is going to be an animation based on the books of Roald Dahl. The other area of interest is that sci-fi and fantasy section. So you can see the grey part at the top of that bar. That is likely to be anime-style content. But we also have quite a lot of sci-fi and fantasy titles stemming from the US as well. Now, what the impact of that commissioning on their acquisitions is likely to be to reduce the number of acquisitions they need in order to maintain growth. So it reduces it from nearly 70 titles down to around 44. Now, in order to fit in with their subscriber acquisition strategy, which is now focused very, very heavily on the international market, a lot of those titles are going to be from non-English language speaking countries. For the UK, it's largely going to be, we project that it's largely going to be children's content. The one thing that we can say is with their huge number of commissions for sci-fi and fantasy content, it's highly unlikely that they would be interested in sort of adding to that what is already a bit of a surplus of animated content. So, do we have any questions?
Netflix now have a UK-based person in Alexi Wheeler. So, are you getting a sense that those animations are going to come out of that sort of commissioning office?
So they are going to be looking for commissions in the UK. I'm certainly not saying that they're not. Their focus is going to be on those sort of children and family titles. That's where their catalogue currently sits. Now, if they have the opportunity to grow their adults animation portfolio, it's quite likely that they will. This is certainly another area of growth for them. But in terms of the number of titles that they've already commissioned, those sci-fi and fantasy titles are not going to be something that it's not a gap they need to fill. Now, that's not to say that they won't be interested in those kind of titles, but it does means it's a good deal less likely. So that's what we can tell with the data that we have.
Hi there, Ken Anderson from Red Kite. I've just returned from Los Angeles, and I was at the animation summit that was being held there, and then went in to see various studios. So in terms of Amazon, there was nobody really there to speak to, so they've all gone to other jobs. One of the interesting observations was about Apple. And they equated it to launching Spotify with 10 albums. How could Apple possibly think that releasing 10 series would be a good idea? So there may be some change there. I think the other interesting thing was HBO Max. A huge ambition there. The other thing was Nickelodeon, Viacom, merging with CBS. And I think there's a bit of a pause there, but I think they're going to be looking at the future and considering how they expand what they're doing. And so, yeah, it was interesting.
Thank you very much. I think it's worth talking just very briefly about Apple. Apple's business model is very much one of content aggregation. So whilst their portfolio of titles that they have themselves is quite small, what they're looking to do is effectively transition Apple users onto their service and act as a content aggregator. So you'll be able to view all of the different services that you subscribe to through a single portal. So the idea is that they will be in charge of your recommendations, they will be in charge of effectively the types of titles that are being offered to you from the variety of services that you subscribe to. So theirs is a content aggregator play. So yeah, I get your point about them not actually doing a huge amount, despite all the bells and whistles that they announced it with. But it's a very different beast to a more traditional sort of video on demand service. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the things that we've shown there is just video-on-demand services. If we want to look at the catalogues for people at Nickelodeon, that is part of the data that we collect. It was just not included within that presentation. Do we have any other questions? Okay, I really have got away with that. Right, excellent. So I'm around for quite a lot of the rest of the day if you would like to have a chat with me. And indeed, if you would like to see a little bit more of our data, I'm more than happy to take you through some of the stuff that we collect and curate. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Great way to start, but I'll start on a couple of apologies. I think it was my fault we were late starting, so I'm glad I'm on last in this section, and the time wrap-up will be, for me, not for anyone else. And as also mentioned, apologies that I'm a man. My boss, Jackie Edwards, would have done this, I'm sure, but if she were not on a jolly in Australia. She's not on a jolly, she's working. An all expenses paid kind of work. I am John Knowles. I'm production executive at the Young Audiences Content Fund, as demonstrated by this really well thought out, colour schemed slide. It's not temporary. Well, it might be. So I'm here to talk about the shock of the new, a bit of a tenuous link towards that. We're kind of 7 months old, but it's still new in as much as we haven't been at Manimation before, so I'm going to talk about the fund and what it is, how it relates to animation. I'll get on to other kind of funding pots towards the end as well. what is it? It is £57 million from, I was going to say this current government, but do we currently have a government? The most recent government. So, you know, amazingly, the most recent government came up with £57 million, which is non-recoupable for this fund to support young people content. And it is to support UK public service content as well. Well, specifically, and it's targeting audiences of 0 to 18, and 18-year-olds being inclusive of that age group as well. And it's a 3-year pilot. So as I say, we started in April. We run for 3 financial years. So it is a pilot, as I say, so we are kind of ever evolving. We are listening to industry. We are here to support industry. So if there's anything that you don't feel quite works, or you know, you've read the guidelines and you think there might be, you know, things that could change, we're happy to listen to you, try and help as much as we can. That's what we're here for. So why does it exist? Well, it's because Ofcom released a report, which I'll let you read those at your leisure, but essentially it said that we weren't producing enough public service content for young people that truly reflects their lives, that truly reflects the UK culture, and specifically for the older teenage. As already been mentioned, you know, that is a kind of field that is being looked at quite a lot by the industry worldwide. But we're looking specifically for that as a priority for the fund, and specifically here for the UK and UK culture, and trying to reflect these older teen lives back at themselves essentially on screen. So that's kind of why we're here. That's why this money has been found, and what it's here to support for. So the priorities. Priorities are quality above all else. It's got to be good, obviously. This is another bit of a tenuous link of innovation. Obviously, this is kind of the theme of the talk. But innovation is part of our criteria, and that is to do with on-screen and off-screen as well. So it's an animation or VFX, kind of something that maybe you haven't seen before, or is very, very new, or forward-thinking, or even off-screen. You know, if it's something that's like a pipeline or a technique that may not be necessarily, you know, visible on screen, but, you know, is innovative off-screen. That's what we're looking for as well. Additionality is to do with other funding streams, essentially. So, you know, if we feel that you need this fund, you know, this content can't be made without this fund, that's what we're looking for. So it could be that we're looking for more kind of commercial, risky content. If there are opportunities out there already to get your funding through, so specifically for animation, I know it is getting harder and harder and harder all the time, but in preschool animation specifically, you know, there are other funding streams you can go to. So if we feel like it's not hitting our additionality, then that might be something you need to kind of think about. But obviously, as I say, for the older age groups, it gets harder and harder to find those funding streams internationally anyway. So it's kind of answering those kind of questions. If it's seen as a commercial risk, you know, that's a good thing for us. It's something that is very, very reflective of our UK culture. That's what we're looking for. It can't be sold internationally, or you know, would be hard to be sold internationally. Nations and regions, yeah, obviously more things outside of London. We're trying to, again, it's got to be reflective of all of the UK. Therefore, you know, again, on screen, off screen, if you've got more content based and made outside of London and within those regions and nations, then, you know, again, you know, great kind of plus point for our criteria. Diversity. It's a word that we've used a lot. We hear it a lot. You know, it's talked about a lot in broadcasters, in content, everywhere, but it is vitally important. It's something that we completely agree with at BFI. BFI have our diversity standards that you have to abide by to be selected on this fund. And as we all know, you know, the more diverse your content, the better it becomes. You know, lots of different people from different viewpoints feeding in. It just makes that content all the richer, and that's what we're looking for. You know, it's got to reflect, you know, these teenagers' lives in the UK as is now. Plurality is about. So we're here as to support the public service broadcasters. So that is, you know, BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5. But the BBC is obviously funded already by the licence payers, and the public service is at the heart of everything they do already. Therefore, the BBC is not necessarily a priority for us because they are so dominant in that field already. So it's our kind of place to try and help the other commercial public service broadcasters a bit more. Oh, and that's the end of that. Thank you very much. No, it'll be back in a minute, I'm sure. There it is. So the BBC is involved in our fund. They are covered by our fund. We will make awards to to things if the BBC are connected, but it is seen as a lower priority just because of their dominance. New voices, again, it's something that we hear a lot, but it's something that is vitally important. We've got to bring on these new creatives, these new voices, these essentially, you know, younger people. Yes, they're going to be closer to this content that we're trying to support, so that's very important. But new voices also is people that maybe haven't worked in, you know, young people's content before. So maybe they've worked in film or in theatre or in any kind of other kind of creative aspect, but not necessarily in this industry. So, you know, it's trying to find those new voices as well. Audience reach. So this is to do with mainly the broadcasters. So it has to be somewhere that has, you know, a significant audience reach, that people are going to see this content somewhere. Now we are supporting also up to, well, probably more than like 5% of the entire fund on indigenous UK languages. So that audience reach could kind of be caveated slightly if it's something that we're making for an indigenous language. It might be that it can be a broadcaster that doesn't necessarily have that audience reach that it would for something in the English language. So they're the priorities. So we're split into two funds, the development fund and the production fund. For the development fund, it is pretty flexible. It can be, you know, almost anything, whatever you need to do. So it needs to be justified. You know, you can't just kind of come in and say, we need everything, you know, please do our entire slate from you know, concept to a trailer or a pilot. It's got to be justified, you know, and you know, it can be that you need a pilot, but we need kind of justification for why you need that pilot. If you have a broadcaster kind of saying, we need to see that, that's fine. As I say, there's no broadcaster commitment required. All we ask is that you have an idea of where it goes. You know, if you know what your content is, you've probably got a good feeling as to where it's going to go as a channel, as a broadcaster. The only time we'd ever ask for a broadcaster to be involved is, as I say, if you're asking for something that's essentially going to cost a lot of money and we're not sure why it's needed. If you have a relationship with a broadcaster and they specifically ask for that and you can prove that, then fine, we can kind of take a look at that. There's no limit on how much you can ask for, apart from 57 million, obviously. Again, all we ask for is that it's justified. If you come to us and you ask for a certain amount of money, you know, please budget it correctly and show us where, you know, it's been spent and why you need that much. And again, we're only limited by how much we have per year or whatever, and what we're kind of spending on everything else. So it could be a case that we've just run out of money by the end of each financial year. But that's the only kind of limitations we have. So there's no cap or anything like that. Specifically for development, for obvious reasons, new voices is a priority for this. So we're looking for younger, not younger, sorry, you know, people that just haven't necessarily had their voice heard before. So it could be that it is a young person. It could be that it's from a place that hasn't, you know, been spoken about before, their story hasn't been told before, or it could be from a different, as I say, you know, theatre or film or what have you. And it is non-recoupable. It's free money. It's your money. It's our money. It's public money. So we're giving it away. Use it. The asterisk is only there because it is for public service and it's there for the public service broadcasters. It's essentially if we fund you and then you aren't able to find that qualifying broadcaster, that I'll come on to how they qualify in a moment, then if it's then kind of sold to something that then is behind a paywall, for instance, an SVOD or something like that, we can't be seen to be supporting that. So unfortunately, we would then have to recoup that fund. But we all enter into the spirit of the fund. We all know what it's there for. So I would imagine that wouldn't happen. So the production fund, which I'm kind of connected to, it's a bit more comfortable area. We can fund up to 50% of the entire production budget, and that is sorry, just trying to read that. So what do you need? You need the 50% or more if possible. As I say, we can fund up to 50, but it's underlined for a reason. We just want to spread that money to as many projects as we can, spread the love to all the different age groups, all the different techniques and whatnot as much as we can. So we ask that you try and do as much kind of business as you can before you come to us. You need a commitment from a free-to-access, Ofcom regulated broadcaster with a significant UK audience reach. As I say, that is all the kind of channels that I've spoken about. The UK reach can be caveated if it is an indigenous language. You need that 50% of budget in place, and where else can you get that budget from? So obviously from the broadcast licence, the UK's tax break, you would qualify as well. There's obviously regional funding screen agencies that you can go to. International sales are, that is possible as well. I've said to someone else before, you'd be hard pushed to find another fund that doesn't complement this fund. The only other fund that doesn't complement this fund is basically other BFI funds, essentially. But yeah, distribution, international pre-sales, you name it, you can kind of use them. When we're talking about, if there's a big financial input from a big international arm, all we ask for is that they don't have creative control, because obviously the whole point of the fund and the whole point of the content that we're going to be supporting will be to reflect the UK culture. Now, if there's a big international financer who then has a creative, has some creative control, they could take away from that. They could make it more international looking, which is not what we want to do. They're not excluded by any stretch of the imagination, but all we ask for is that it has that UK centre or that UK culture at its heart, and it's not taken away from that. We were going to touch upon the media investment and in the UK, the EU, and I would, if anyone's fuzzy on that, like, as many of us probably are, as I am, I would encourage you to go to the BFI website, because we have a report on that, and it's very, very meticulous about what you can, how it stands at the moment. At the moment, we're still, included in it. It runs until 2020, the end of 2020, and it can be used with this fund, definitely. But then who knows what's going to happen with elections and whatnot. If we go out without a deal, that's it. All bets are off, and we're out of that fund as well. If we're out with the current deal that's on the table, then we are still in, so that's fine up until the end of 2020, and then whatever's negotiated beyond that. But as it stands right now, as we are still in the EU, we still qualify. So that's kind of a rough guide, but I would ask you to go and seek out on our website exactly how it stands. But as I say, international co-pros with Canada or France, or taking advantage of tax breaks in their island, whatnot. That is still included, as I say, just with that caveat that we don't have that creative control taken away from the broadcaster and the production company based here in the UK. So that's it. Got a couple of minutes for questions, if anyone has any questions whatsoever. Yes, one here.
Hello, I'm Genevieve Dexter. I saw that you announced all the funding for the series, which were largely live action, I think, with I think there was one from Milkshake, which was animation, and we're all eagerly awaiting the results of the development funding.
Yes. Yes, so well spotted. Yes, we've made our slate announcement a few days ago. As I say, as a priority from the Ofcom report, we were looking at the older age, and specifically they were looking at live action as well. That's not to say that animation is out or preschool animation is out at all. We will definitely be making those awards. So as you say, in that there was an animation award, and that was for a slightly older kind of age group. There's also, there was a preschool show in there for Milkshake that's going to be a mixed media, so that included animation as well. But going forward, it's definitely, animation is included in the fund. We are going to make more animation awards. We will make preschool animation awards, but as I say, it's just for that additionality question. It needs to be something so unique, so UK culture, something that we just feel this can't be made without this fund. It desperately needs something like this fund to make it, and we will definitely go for it. There's things that we're looking at the moment. I'm sure there's going to be plenty more coming in the future, and it's definitely something that we want to look at. As I say, it covers all techniques, so animation is definitely in there, and I think animation specifically has that ask for innovation. There's going to be more and more of it, or VFX or whatever. So it's definitely something we're going to be looking at. Anyone else?
I'll just do a quick one, which is to say that as well as the BFA website, which is excellent on the Media Fund, there's full video and a very full textual note on the sessions that we did at our Brexit event last week, and the first part of that was entirely about the continuation of the fund, the Media Fund, and access to the Media Fund. I mean, there are some interesting things to understand. One is that if you have applied to the fund and we leave the EU before the fund monies turn up, the British government is guaranteeing those monies, and if we do crash out of the EU and there is no deal, and therefore we have no access to the fund or the continuation of the fund from 2020 to 2027, which is the next version of the Media Fund, then the government is looking at creating a national fund, and is very much open to conversations with people. They want to hear from you. The DCMS want to hear from you as to how you think that fund should be if it comes to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to kind of highlight, as you say, that would be a totally different kind of fund to this fund. They are two separate things.
Oh, that was, the one political thing that we did get out of the Brexit meeting was a statement from a very senior person at the DCMS to say that the Young Audiences Content Fund is not the replacement for the Media Fund. Correct. Will not be the replacement for the Media Fund. There will be a separate fund to stimulate, I suppose, co-production. But the Young Audiences Content Fund, despite rumours to the contrary, is definitely not that.
Correct. Any more questions? If not, I'm around. I'm in the one-to-one meetings, so if you see me sat there forlornly on my own, please come along and say hello. Ask me a question. That's fine. Okay. Thank you very much.